In the quiet routine of her everyday life, a forbidden passion ignited when a 42-year-old married woman found herself at the epicenter of an unwelcome attraction. Her best friend's son, young and captivating, bestowed upon her glances full of undisguised desire, making her heart beat in an anxious rhythm. What began as an innocent exchange of glances rapidly transformed into a turbulent whirlwind of secret, fervent, and all-consuming feelings. Until this moment, the woman had always looked down upon romances where a young man found solace in the arms of an older woman. She believed such unions contradicted the very essence of ideal relationships, which, to her, involved two adults connected by shared interests, life experience, and a deep emotional bond transcending mere physical attraction. She regarded such relationships with a degree of skepticism, suspecting that the young man was drawn not by the person herself, but rather by the allure of forbidden fruit, a desire to step outside conventional norms. This judgment, deeply rooted in her mind, seemed unshakable, like one of those principles we take for granted without questioning. But at this very moment, like a bolt from the blue, her long-held beliefs began to crumble. On her birthday, in a cozy cafe where her closest friends had gathered to celebrate, something happened that turned her world upside down. Amidst the general merriment and carefree laughter, she noticed 18-year-old Romula, her friend's son, looking at her with an expression that was impossible to ignore. His gaze, full of secret attraction, seemed to be drawn to her like a magnet, leaving her no chance for indifference. At first, she tried to ignore these glances, continuing her lively conversation with friends, but a feeling of awkwardness and strange excitement lingered. She realized that her dress immodestly exposed part of her leg, and she tried to conceal this fact, pretending nothing was amiss. However, throughout the evening, she was haunted by the feeling that someone was looking at her differently than usual. Romula, always well-mannered and reserved, had never allowed himself liberties or ambiguous hints. He seemed to be an epitome of propriety and respect for elders. And yet, it was he who was giving her glances that didn't go unnoticed. Soon, the woman began to wonder, what if it was true? What if she genuinely attracted his attention? This thought, like an insistent melody, wouldn't leave her mind. Perhaps it was just a fleeting infatuation, a trick of her imagination, but each time their eyes met, she felt something more, the realization that there was a certain mystery in his eyes he was trying to unravel. It was the gaze of someone intrigued by something that stirred a storm of emotions within him. Despite all attempts to forget the episode, the memory of Romula's gaze lingered with her, like a troubling whisper, making her doubt the immutability of her own convictions. At the end of the evening, as everyone dispersed, she realized that the exchange of glances had awakened feelings within her that she wasn't ready to acknowledge. Something about it challenged the boundaries of her judgment, forcing her to reevaluate her views on life and love. What would happen next? Would she be able to resist the temptation, or would she succumb to the forbidden passion that threatened to shatter her familiar world? The answer to that question remained open, like an invitation to further developments. On the way home in the car with her husband, her gaze drifted over the fleeting landscapes outside the window, while her mind was preoccupied with a complex tangle of emotions. She knew that her rational perception of such situations remained unchanged. Her mind still held a skeptical view of relationships where young men and older women formed a union. However, she couldn't deny that in this particular case, there was something special, something that unexpectedly touched upon her own doubts and perhaps even vulnerabilities she hadn't known she possessed. Back in her home, as she prepared for bed, she noticed that the unease hadn't subsided. That fleeting glance, seemingly an insignificant episode, had left an indelible mark that, she realized, wouldn't simply fade away. For the first time in a long while, she felt her own convictions being challenged, which simultaneously brought disorientation, curiosity, and a slight sense of guilt. As she turned off the bedroom light, she admitted that this encounter had affected her far more deeply than she wished to acknowledge. Returning home that evening, she felt an inner stir, even if she didn't want to admit it. Her husband, lost in his own thoughts and tired, paid no attention to her inner turmoil. He simply drove the car along their usual route and then quickly fell asleep in their bedroom. For him, the evening had passed uneventfully, without any emotional surges. But for her, it was different, a restlessness that wouldn't let go and gradually filled her mind with unexpected reflections. Lying beside him as he slept peacefully, she delved into the day's events, the birthday celebration, the party with friends, the casual conversations, and finally, Romula's restrained yet expressive glances. Why had she allowed herself to react this way? It was something that, ideally, should have been insignificant, a ridiculous situation, a fleeting glance from a young man. Why couldn't she just let it go and forget? The truth was, no matter how much she tried to convince herself of its insignificance, her reaction suggested otherwise. There was something to it, a spark, a feeling that she had experienced a tension she hadn't felt in a long time. It felt as if she saw herself as she hadn't seen herself in years, with the curiosity, admiration, and even intensity of someone looking with fresh eyes, a gaze that made her recall her youth, which seemed to have been left in the past. For a moment, she tried to push these thoughts away, convincing herself it was merely an exaggerated interpretation. However, the more she tried to rationalize, the stronger her feelings surged forth. She felt as though she was waging an internal battle, where her rational side strove to maintain composure and the moral principles that had always guided her. At the same time, something deeper and more instinctive persistently brought back memories of vibrant youth, of a time when everything was new and full of possibilities. The memory of that gaze transported her back to a time when she herself was 18, looking at the world with hungry eyes, where every experience seemed full of life and meaning. It seemed almost ironic that now, at 42, she was affected by the gaze of such a young man, a youth just beginning to discover life and all its possibilities. And strange as it might sound, she couldn't escape the comparison. He was at a stage she had passed many years ago, and somehow, that gaze, despite all its simplicity and naivety, made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. In an attempt to calm her mind, other stages of her life surfaced in her memory. She recalled her own son, now 21, a grown young man, married and preparing to become a father. She pondered how quickly life had flown by, how she had changed over the years, and how her worldview had transformed. At some point, routine and responsibilities had consumed everything, and those moments of excitement and novelty had given way to stability and predictability. Not that she complained about it, but now something within her seemed to crave a spark of surprise, something to pull her out of the mundane. Romula's presence that evening had touched something within her she hadn't even known existed, and no matter how much her mind tried to resist, the truth was that being seen by him made her feel something she hadn't experienced in a long time. There was something incredibly forbidden, audacious about it, something that seemed to ignite a curiosity she thought had long since died. At the same time, the awareness of the age difference, her status as his mother's friend, and, of course, her married status made the entire situation a huge paradox. It was like walking a fine line between right and wrong, between reason and emotion, and any misstep could throw her off balance. Night enveloped everything around, and the protagonist's mind continued to process the events of the past few days. Romula's presence, his perceptive glances, and genuine display of interest forced her to re-examine her own beliefs and prejudices. Why had she always been so critical of relationships with a noticeable age gap? Perhaps it was a result of societal stereotypes or even a reflection of her own insecurities. However, she was now beginning to see the situation in a different light, contemplating the potential possibilities this mutual attraction could bring. Nevertheless, the shadow of doubt and fear relentlessly followed her, reminding her of the potential consequences of rash decisions. What would happen if she allowed this feeling to develop? How would it affect her life, Romula's life, his mother's, and even her husband's? The ramifications seemed colossal and, to some extent, frightening. But at that moment, what most captivated her was the desire to feel like the center of attention, to experience a connection unburdened by the routine of shared life and daily worries. With the first rays of sun came the realization that she had spent the night almost sleepless. The protagonist felt exhausted, yet her mind remained full of questions. Fortified by strong coffee, she decided to face the new day with a clear head, refraining from hasty conclusions or decisions. Perhaps it was just a fleeting whim of a mature woman, longing to feel desired and admired again. Or perhaps something more lay behind it, something that required careful examination to avoid irreparable mistakes. She promised herself to observe her feelings, without succumbing to pressure or bias. But deep down, she knew that Romula's presence had awakened something new within her, something that, despite all attempts to control it, continued to grow, challenging conventional norms. Her life would no longer be the same after that memorable birthday. Something within her had changed, as if a small spark had ignited, illuminating long-forgotten corners of her soul. She tried to return to her usual rhythm of life, attending to daily tasks, but the memories of fleeting glances and the feeling of admiration continued to haunt her, even when she was engrossed in routine duties. A few days later, the phone rang. It was her friend, Romula's mother. She offered to bring over some homemade preserves, pickled cucumbers and tomatoes. Citing her busyness, she asked Romula to deliver them by bicycle. These words stirred a veritable whirlwind of emotions within the protagonist. That morning, she kept glancing at the clock, wondering how long it would take Romula to reach her, experiencing a mixed feeling of anticipation and excitement that she didn't want to admit to herself. She decided to take a shower and dress up a little, as if preparing for a special occasion. This ritual calmed her, and each gesture lent her confidence. The chosen outfit was modest enough, yet allowed her to feel attractive. Realizing her actions, she felt a slight blush on her cheeks. Why was his arrival so important to her? He was merely coming to do her a small favor. About half an hour later, the doorbell rang. The protagonist's heart beat faster, and she couldn't understand what this feeling was. Taking a deep breath, she tried to calm herself and went to open the door, attempting to conceal her nervousness. Standing at the threshold was Romula, with a shy smile and a gaze fixed directly on her eyes, holding a basket of homemade preserves. "Hello, Romula. How good of you to come," she said, trying to sound as casual as possible. He smiled, seemingly a little embarrassed, but clearly happy to see her. His gaze, full of curiosity and admiration, warmed her soul. She invited him in and offered him tea. He hesitated for a moment but eventually agreed. They sat at the kitchen table, and she began preparing the drink, trying to think of a topic for conversation to break the silence hanging in the air. Looking at him, she noticed he was still very young, with signs of uncertainty, yet at the same time, a nascent determination shone through. He was well-mannered and inquisitive. After an awkward pause, the protagonist decided to ask a question that had long troubled her. "Romula, since that birthday," she began, choosing her words carefully, "tell me, do you find me attractive?" The question came out almost spontaneously and hung in the air. Romula was clearly surprised. He looked away, and it took him a moment to respond. "Yes, that is, yes, I find you very beautiful." The words came out slowly, as if he was afraid to break some unspoken taboo. The woman tried to hide her nervousness behind a strained smile, her gaze, full of tenderness and curiosity, fixed on the young man. He, who until recently had been perceived merely as an acquaintance's son, now appeared to her as something far more significant, something she couldn't yet fully comprehend. "Do you know what I find wonderful?" she said. "Your candor. To encounter such sincerity at such a young age is truly rare. Someone who isn't afraid to express their thoughts so openly. Don't worry, Romula," she added. "I'm genuinely interested in hearing your perspective." The young man seemed to relax a little, his gaze grew more confident, as if some barrier between them had been broken. They spent the rest of the day in lively conversation on a variety of topics, and at some point, the discussion touched upon their visions for the future. The woman listened intently, fascinated by how the young man perceived the world, how everything seemed new and full of possibilities to him. In turn, he absorbed her every word with genuine interest, captivated by her life experience. Behind the image of a young man lay a depth and sensibility that pleasantly surprised the woman. Romula proved to be a person inclined to ponder the world, human relationships, and the paths he wished to choose. Perhaps this was what attracted her so strongly. He reminded her of her younger self, someone who viewed the future as a boundless field, full of adventures and prospects. However, along with this, an internal conflict began to brew within the woman's soul. She was aware of the age difference, understood that she was his mother's friend, and that this could create awkwardness and difficulties. But at that moment, all of it seemed unimportant, as if his presence was so potent it dispelled any doubts. She allowed herself to forget the rules and simply enjoy the present moment, something she hadn't done in a very long time. When the young man was about to leave, the woman felt a certain emptiness, as if this moment shouldn't end. But he said goodbye with a smile and promised to return soon, which brought her both excitement and relief. As she watched him go, she couldn't suppress a faint smile. Something had changed, that much was clear. Perhaps it was something subtle, yet entirely real, that she felt in every fiber of her being. Back inside the house, she delved into reflection on everything that had transpired. The woman realized that no matter how much she tried to hide it, Romula's presence awakened a youthfulness and vitality within her that she thought she had lost. And no matter how she tried to rationalize or avoid it, she knew she wanted to see him again, to prolong these moments, even while aware of the potential risks. Romula had breathed new energy into her life, energy she wasn't prepared to easily give up. As she tidied up, she couldn't shake a feeling of anticipation. The woman understood that this was only the beginning, and despite the uncertainty, she was ready to follow this path and discover what else fate had in store for her, even if it meant confronting her own principles and risking everything she had built over the years. Romula's unexpected visit had left an indelible impression on her. In the following days, she tried to convince herself that her feelings were merely a fleeting infatuation, brought on by his youth. But it was difficult to ignore how profoundly he had affected her. No matter how hard she tried, his image constantly resurfaced in her thoughts, like an insistent melody impossible to forget. Their conversations, glances, the sense of novelty, all of it evoked a nostalgia in her that went far beyond mere memories. It was almost like a yearning to relive long-forgotten feelings. At some point, the woman realized she needed a plan to see him again without appearing strange or overly eager. She didn't want him to think she was looking for something more, as she was still his mother's friend and couldn't allow the situation to become awkward for either of them. Yet, at the same time, she felt a need to understand where these feelings might lead. It seemed to her that he, in a way, represented a last chance to experience that youth which now felt so distant. After several days of contemplation, she decided to call her friend and ask for a favor. She did so casually, as if it were of no great consequence, explaining that she needed help moving a heavy cabinet out of her house. "My husband," she said, "is busy with work, and I don't want to wait until the weekend." She casually inquired if Romula might be able to help her. Her friend readily agreed, saying he'd be happy to assist. She informed her that he could come that very day, as soon as he finished his classes, and the woman, trying to conceal the excitement in her voice, accepted her offer. That day, she prepared her home as if expecting an important guest. She tidied the rooms, straightened the living area, and chose comfortable yet attractive clothing. Her heart beat faster with each passing minute, and she felt like a teenager awaiting her first date. It was a strange yet thrilling sensation. When the long-awaited doorbell finally rang, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for the impending encounter. Romula entered with the same shy smile as before, his gaze seeming to wander slightly, a little lost. She quickly explained that the cumbersome cabinet was in the back room and that they would need to work together to move it out of the house, perhaps even to the curb. The young man nodded silently and, without further ado, headed toward the designated room. While he assessed the scope of the task, she suggested they take a short break before starting. She brewed fragrant tea, and they settled back at the kitchen table, as if repeating an already familiar ritual. The atmosphere was filled with a sense of comfort and predictability, and she noted that Romula also seemed more relaxed, as if he had grown accustomed to their quiet tradition. The conversation flowed easily and naturally. They exchanged updates on everyday matters, talking about his studies at school. Gradually, the conversation became more candid and personal, and she noticed the young man opening up and becoming more unreserved. He spoke of his innermost dreams for the future, his desire to travel the world, see different countries, and find a profession that truly inspired him. He shared his fears and doubts, things that were probably not easy to share with others. It seemed he felt safe in her presence, and this deeply touched her. At some point, yielding to a sudden impulse, she asked Romula, "Have you ever considered dating someone older?" The question seemed to catch him off guard, and he fell silent for a moment, as if trying to process her words. Finally, collecting his thoughts, he answered honestly, with a sincerity unique to young people, "Yes, yes, I find you very beautiful," he said, looking at her with such openness that she felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. His gaze held a mix of curiosity and admiration, as if igniting a long-forgotten flame within her, a desire to break down the barriers she had built around herself and follow her heart's call, despite societal conventions. At that moment, she realized that despite all her attempts to control her feelings, they were stronger than her. Romula's attention gave her a sense of life, awakening a feeling of renewal within her that she wasn't going to ignore. Once they finished their tea, she stood up and offered to help him with the cabinet. As they headed to the back room, she felt the atmosphere around them shift. A certain tension hung in the air, something they both sensed but dared not voice. When they tried to move the cabinet, their hands accidentally brushed for a moment, and that brief touch was enough to make her heart beat faster. It seemed he, too, was affected by the fleeting moment. He looked away and blushed slightly, but continued with the task decisively. When they finally managed to get the cabinet outside, he let out a sigh of relief, and they both laughed, as if they had just completed an exciting adventure. After a while, they sat down again, and she looked at him with a tenderness she couldn't hide. "Romula," she began, choosing her words carefully, "I wanted to thank you not just for your help today, but for reminding me what it feels like to feel alive again." He looked at her in surprise and remained silent for a few seconds. It seemed he was trying to understand what she meant, but at the same time, she felt he was experiencing something similar. A certain connection had formed between them, and though neither knew where it would lead, it was clear they both wanted to find out. Before leaving, he took her hand and, with a shy smile, said, "I like spending time with you. It's something special, and it makes me feel good." As he said goodbye and walked out the door, she stood frozen, absorbing his every word, every gesture, every glance. She understood that the situation was fraught with risk, that the age difference and circumstances could complicate everything, but at that moment, none of that mattered. A silent promise hung between them, the possibility of something more, something she might be ready to explore. That night, as she prepared for bed, she felt a sense of peace envelop her. She decided to give herself a chance, to allow herself to feel, to take a risk, and, who knew, perhaps find new meaning in life alongside Romula. She didn't know what the future held for them, but for the first time in a long while, she was ready to find out. After Romula's last visit, she felt that something had truly changed. A feeling of anticipation and excitement accompanied her every moment of the day. She thought of him constantly, as if a part of her lived for these brief encounters, when the world became brighter and fuller. Part of her feared what all of this meant, the risks and consequences, but somehow, this attraction seemed inevitable. Then one sunny day, she received a message from Romula, which was quite rare. He wrote casually, asking if he could come over and help her with anything around the house. She smiled as she read his message, feeling a warmth of anticipation. She replied that she could actually use his help organizing the attic, a task she had been putting off for a long time. He readily agreed, and they arranged a time for him to come over. That day, she was filled with an excitement, a long-forgotten sense of anticipation. She meticulously prepared her home, striving for perfect order, and dressed in clothing that blended comfort and style. She realized that every gesture, every detail, could take on special significance in this momentous encounter. His arrival brought a familiar tremor to her. Upon seeing her, he offered a smile, and she noticed something new in him, a newfound confidence. His demeanor hinted at reflection on their recent encounters, perhaps he harbored similar feelings. With each new meeting, their connection grew stronger. She felt increasingly drawn in, even as she tried to maintain some semblance of rationality. They went up to the attic to sort through boxes, an activity that didn't require much help, but served as a perfect pretext for spending time together. Soon, they were swept up in a whirlwind of laughter and lively conversation about everything and nothing. It seemed that in this secluded corner, the world outside ceased to exist, leaving only the two of them, spontaneously and eagerly rediscovering each other. Her stories captivated his imagination. She shared with him memories of her youth, thrilling adventures, significant life choices, and even regrets accumulated over the years. He listened intently, with genuine interest, and his admiring gaze made her heart race. At one point, as she showed him old photographs, their hands brushed accidentally, and neither pulled away. They froze, their eyes met, and time seemed to stand still. A palpable tension filled the air, something growing between them that could no longer be ignored. He slowly drew closer, as if hesitant to invade her personal space, and she, unable to resist, responded to his movement until their faces were mere inches apart. The kiss happened naturally, without a single word. It was a moment they seemed to have waited an eternity for, finally brought to life. As their lips met, she felt an explosion of emotions, as if a part of her being was reborn, experiencing life in its purest and most intense form. It was a blend of tenderness, passion, and something deeply familiar that made the moment even more special. Their kiss was long and meaningful. Each second seemed imbued with all the feelings and unspoken words they had held in their hearts. When they pulled apart, he looked at her with surprise and joy, as if unable to believe what had just transpired. "I never thought this was possible," he murmured, still processing the moment. She smiled and touched his face, feeling the softness of his young skin. "Sometimes life brings us surprises," she replied, still trying to grasp what this meant for her. After that kiss, something shifted between them. A new intimacy emerged, a silent understanding that something special was blossoming. They descended from the attic and settled on the living room sofa, spending the rest of the day talking and sharing stories from their lives. This day became a turning point, the beginning of something that, though risky, felt undeniably real. Time flew by, and as the sun began to set, he prepared to leave. Before departing, he squeezed her hand tightly, as if to convey how much this encounter meant to him. She walked him to the door, and he said goodbye with a smile that held a mixture of happiness and anticipation for what might come next. As soon as he left, a wave of emotions washed over her. It was truly happening. She, a mature woman, a mother, his mother's friend, was beginning a relationship with a young man who had barely turned 18. Her rational mind recognized the full complexity of the situation, the moral and social implications. Yet, the feelings she experienced seemed strong enough to break down any barriers. She spent the night reflecting on what had transpired. She understood that this attraction could bring her many problems, that societal norms and expectations would surely be against them, but for the first time in a long while, she decided to surrender to her feelings, to live this connection without dwelling on the possible consequences. The following days dragged on agonizingly slowly, each marked by a growing desire to see him. She eagerly awaited his every message, every call, and gradually an unspoken routine established itself between them. He found ways to visit her without arousing suspicion, and they tried to make the most of every minute spent together, as if time itself were their main adversary. Thus began a new chapter in her life, and however uncertain it might be, she was ready to embrace every moment with him. She didn't know where it would lead, but she understood that regardless of the outcome, it had already become an experience that changed her and her perception of life. In that moment, she realized that some stories simply happen, regardless of her will or control, as if guided by an external force. And no matter how much she resisted, they ultimately showed her that life is made of such moments, of unexpected encounters and people who appear to change everything she thought about herself. After the memorable kiss in the attic, every day was filled with a hidden tension. Each meeting, each word, revealed new facets of their feelings, weaving their relationship into something special. Such a fragile and unusual connection could not remain a secret forever. However, a fine line existed between sincerely living in the moment and confronting reality, and despite attempts to ignore it, signs of inevitable exposure became increasingly evident. One day, while walking with Romulus in the park, she felt an unpleasant chill as she noticed the glances of several passers-by. Their eyes held curiosity, but they quickly looked away, as if choosing not to interfere. For her, it was a harsh reminder of the precariousness of their situation. For the rest of the day, she was plagued by an anxiety that Romulus couldn't help but notice. When he asked about the reason for her worry, she merely offered a strained smile, trying to conceal her unease. The thought of the potential suffering this could bring to both of them gave her no peace. Soon, what she feared most happened, an unexpected message from her close friend, Romulus's mother, urgently requesting a meeting. At first, she tried to convince herself it could be about anything, but deep down, she already sensed the inevitable. When she arrived at her friend's house, she was struck by the expression on her face, a mixture of disappointment, anger, and deep sadness she had never seen before. For several long moments, her friend silently stared at her, as if searching for words to express the storm of emotions. "I can't believe what I'm hearing," she began, her voice trembling. "How could you, my longtime friend, get involved with my son? How could this happen?" A chill ran down her spine, and trying to respond, she found the words stuck in her throat. Her friend continued speaking, alternating questions with reproaches, unable to comprehend how something like this could have happened right under her nose. She understood that no excuses could change her friend's feelings. No matter how she tried to explain that everything had happened spontaneously and was unplanned, it couldn't justify the pain she saw in her eyes. Eventually, her friend asked her to end the relationship with Romulus, to show respect for her family, and to put a stop to this connection, which she deemed unacceptable and destructive. Her words sounded like a verdict. On one hand, she understood her friend's request was fair, and perhaps she would have acted the same way in her shoes. But on the other hand, the thought of separating from Romulus, of losing what had become so important in her life, seemed unbearable. She returned home in a state of numbness, consumed by pain and confusion. Hours spent in contemplation brought no solution that would satisfy everyone. The reality was harsh and unrelenting. Their relationship defied societal norms and caused pain to those close to them. She knew she needed to talk to Romulus. The next day, she called him and suggested they meet in a secluded place, away from prying eyes and judgment. When he arrived, his face showed curiosity and apprehension, as if he anticipated an important conversation. She told him about her talk with his mother and her demand to end their relationship. She explained that while their connection was undeniably important, the feelings of others, especially his mother, also mattered and could not be ignored. He looked at her with pain and disbelief, struggling to accept what he heard. "But doesn't what we feel, everything we've experienced together, matter?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It matters immensely, Romulus," she replied, holding back tears. "But sometimes, to preserve what we have, we also need to respect those around us. And as painful as it is, I believe this is the best path for both of us." In the ensuing silence, they looked at each other, and her heart broke with sadness. She understood this was not just a farewell to him, but also a farewell to a part of herself that had been reborn beside him. Romulus squeezed her hand, and they remained sitting together, absorbing the full weight of the moment. Finally, he bid her farewell with a tender kiss, the last expression of love that encapsulated everything they had shared. After that day, her life took a different path. Memories of moments spent with Romulus remained with her, but over time, they transformed into sweet, nostalgic images. Gradually, she found ways to regain happiness and new meaning in life, despite the difficulties. Romulus went his own way. Although their paths diverged, she knew he cherished those memories with the same warmth as she did. She found the strength within herself to value this experience, which taught her the courage to question her own beliefs, open her heart to new things, and navigate life's most complex emotions. As time passed, she began to view this story as an important chapter in her life, one that allowed her to grow and redefine herself, even if the outcome wasn't what she had imagined. Occasionally, the author received updates about Romulus from his mother, who would sometimes share news of his academic successes and exciting travels. A certain unspoken respect remained between them, an unvoiced acknowledgement that this shared history had left an indelible mark on their lives. However, despite this, they both continued to move forward, each on their own path. It was a unique way to honor the past without destroying the friendship and connection that had begun even before these events. Today, looking back, the author realizes that this experience was one of the most profound and transformative in her life. It taught her valuable lessons about the complexity of human relationships, the power of emotions, and the importance of finding harmony between personal desires and life's demands. Despite all the difficulties, this period gave the author something priceless that she will carefully cherish in her memory, the certainty that in every chapter of life, there is room for love, for thrilling adventures, and for discovering new facets of oneself. Thus, the author and Romulus's story came to an end, but the memories of it remained in her heart, like a gentle reminder that even in the most unpredictable situations, life always finds a way to surprise and impart valuable lessons. Every experience, every encounter holds its own special significance and its unique moment.